Hey guys, it's Mariana, and today, as you can tell by the title, we're talking about everything that I read and watched throughout October. I know this wrap-up is a little bit late, and that's just because I had other videos to post, to be honest, but next time we're going to be back on schedule, and my wrap-up is going to be around the first of the month. As usual, everything that I'm talking about is going to be listed in the info bar below, so don't forget to check that out, and there are timestamps in there as well, so if you want to skip to a certain part of the video first, you can do that by clicking on a timestamp. And I am going to get started with the books as always, and man was I in a reading slump in October. I only read, are you ready for this? I only read 2 books. This hasn't happened in years to me. I did read a lot of comic books, well, compared to the amount of books that I read, but as far as actual novels go, I only read 2, and the first one that I read was The Dead House by Dawn Kurtagage. The Dead House is a horror mystery novel, and in the beginning of the book, we learn that this girl, Carly, has been diagnosed with an identity disorder, and she says that she actually has a sister named Caitlin, and then the two of them share one body. So during the day, Carly is there, and then at night, Caitlin shows up, and neither of them remember what happened to the other half. So the way that they communicate is they write these notes and they write a diary that the other person can read. And that's kind of all you need to know about this. There's also a school fire that is kind of a mystery that is mentioned in the beginning of the book, and that's kind of what is being investigated through this diary and through some transcripts and interviews and all of that. And the format of this book is where it really shines, because this entire book is told through found footage. This essentially is a book equivalent of a found footage movie, which is pretty unique. I've never encountered a book that was entirely made out of that, and it's definitely a very interesting way to tell a story. There is some genuinely disturbing and creepy shit that happens in this book, and what makes it even creepier is that as a reader, you don't really know if this is a psychological thriller or if the book suddenly took a turn for paranormal, and I obviously can't tell you because that would be spoilers. In general, I think this book would make a really good movie. If they ever decided to make this into a movie and they got some awesome visuals for this and they got an actress that could pull off the 2 characters in one, it would be really awesome. But as a book, for me, the story was a little bit lacking and it felt a little long. You know how when you watch a found footage movie and there's a lot of footage that's just kind of waiting for things to happen because it's mundane stuff that just is kind of included to build the overall atmosphere? That's kind of how I felt about the story in this book, and I definitely wanted more from it, so I ended up rating it 3 out of 5 stars. Like I said, I still enjoyed reading it, and it was fun and creepy, and that's what I wanted from it, and the gimmick of the storytelling definitely worked for me because it is unique, but it's not something that's going to stick with you for a long time and make you think about it for weeks after you read it, at least not the way I see it. So if this sounds like an interesting concept to you, definitely pick it up and you're going to enjoy reading this. Just don't expect this to be your next favorite book. That's the best way I can describe it. Let me know if you read this and if you felt the same way. And the other book that I finished in October is Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel, and as you can see, I kind of went crazy tabbing it, which isn't even something that I normally do with books, but as I was reading it, there were so many moments where I just wanted to kind of pause and think about things, or something that really spoke to me, or something that really kind of was just beautifully written and described in an interesting way, so I ended up tabbing it a lot. This is a post-apocalyptic novel that is not young adult, and that is something I need more of in my life. So if you have read Station 11 and you have something similar to recommend, please do so in the comments. This starts with a performance of King Lear, and an actor has a heart attack and dies on stage. Then we get into the onset of this flu that wipes out pretty much everybody on Earth, with a very small percentage of people surviving. And then the book jumps 20 years ahead when the post-apocalyptic situation is in full swing, and we get introduced to a traveling theater troupe, which is, first of all, a very interesting group of people to follow, because usually, at least in my experience, in post-apocalyptic books, we deal with people who are hardcore trying to survive. They're fighters, they're fighting the government that has been established, they're the resistance, whatever, you know what I'm talking about. But here we have a group of people who are musicians and actors, and they're trying to keep kind of the arts alive even in this crazy world, which is really neat. But they're also surviving. That's also a thing in this book. One of my favorite things about Station 11 was the writing. It was just so beautiful and meaningful, and the author definitely likes to make you think about things that you wouldn't normally consider. Just the way she highlights certain details is very interesting. I loved the characters and the way they interacted with each other. In the beginning, you get a little bit overwhelmed with the amount of characters that you encounter, but later on, you kind of see their paths intertwine, and you kind of understand the connection even throughout the years for people that may not have actually met. It is very, very interesting, and I loved it about this book. As far as the pacing goes, I would say it's pretty moderate. It's not slow by any means, but it's not super action-packed either. There are some intense moments in here, but overall, it's pretty moderate, and it's still something that keeps your attention. I wanted to keep reading it. It doesn't really matter that it's not a super action-driven book, and I would just describe it as being kind of a quietly beautiful novel. That is kind of the best way I can describe this. I ended up giving it 4.5 out of 5 stars. I cannot recommend this enough. I thought it was great, and it is definitely one of my favorite books that I've read in 2015 so far. Moving on to comics, the first comic book series that I got into was Revival. I read 3 volumes of Revival, and I really, really like this. I have no idea where this is going, even after 3 volumes, so it's definitely keeping me on the edge of my seat. I have talked about Revival in my 5 horror comics that you should be reading video, so check it out for more detailed information. But essentially, this is about a town in rural Wisconsin where one day the dead start coming back to life, and they're not coming back to life as mindless crazy zombies or anything. They are just kind of seemingly normal, but not really. Something's off about it. Anyways, if you're looking for a good horror comic book series to read, I would definitely suggest checking this out. I ended up giving volume 1 and 2 4 out of 5 stars, and volume 3 5 out of 5 stars, because so far I thought this one was the best. The other comic book series that I got into in October is American Vampire, and I also talked about it in that video that I just mentioned, so once again, check that out. This is pretty self-explanatory. It's about vampires, but you know, the awesome scary monster vampires, not the brooding boyfriend terrible vampires. So these are very, very interesting. If you're looking once again for a good comic that is horror, I would definitely suggest checking it out. I gave the first volume 4.5 out of 5 stars, the second volume 4 out of 5 stars, and the third volume 5 out of 5 stars. And another cool thing about the series is that every volume takes place in a different decade. So this one's in the 20s, the second one's in the 30s, and then the third one's in the 40s. And as far as I understand, this trend continues throughout the series. And the last comic that I read in October was The Crow by James O'Barr. And you probably already know that I am kind of obsessed with the movie The Crow, so it was time for me to read the actual source material, and I ended up loving it. There was no way I was not going to love this, but what I didn't expect is how dark this one is. It makes the movie look optimistic, which it kind of is, but really it isn't. This is definitely different from any comic that I read before. First of all, because it is so dark and violent. I have never encountered that. And second of all, the art style is definitely something that I haven't encountered before. It is black and white, and it almost looks imperfect in some parts. It is imperfect in some parts, which makes this feel even more personal. As far as I've read, the author actually was coming out of a personal experience while writing this, and he kind of tried to write this as a way of dealing with a traumatic event in his life, and supposedly it didn't actually help much, which is kind of terrible. And you can kind of really tell because every page of this is just filled with like pain and anger, and it's definitely not something that's for everybody, but it is so powerful, and I kind of feel like that's a must read because of that. Now, this definitely needs to come with a whole list of trigger warnings, and if you are sensitive to things like rape and drug use and depression and self-harm, then this may be a little bit too intense. I am not particularly sensitive when it comes to triggering stuff, but even for me, this kind of almost seemed a little too dark in some places. However, this is not all depressing. There are some very beautiful moments in here, and there is some poetry and song lyrics in here which are just beautiful, and there's some awesome dark humor also. I ended up giving this 5 out of 5, of course, and let me know if you guys want me to do a comparison video between this and the movie at some point, because the movie and the comic are actually pretty different, even though they definitely have the same themes and some of the same plot points. Let me know in the comments below. And finally, moving on to movies, which I do have full reviews for most of these on my channel, so I will link them down below. If you haven't seen them yet, you can check them out. The first movie that I saw in October was The Walk, starring Joseph Gordon-Levitt and directed by Robert Zemeckis. This is about Philippe Petit, the same guy from Man on Wire documentary who did the famous walk between the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. And I ended up having some very conflicted feelings about how to rate this movie, which doesn't usually happen, but I honestly couldn't decide if I should give it a 3.5 or a 4 out of 5. You can hear all about it in my video, because on one hand, I found this to be a very inspirational film, and a film that definitely tugs on your heartstrings, and everything that has to do with the walk between the two towers is fantastic, and that's kind of the main event that everybody shows up for. But then this first half of the movie is not particularly as interesting, and there are definitely weaker points to this movie. After that, I saw Crimson Peak, which is the new Guillermo del Toro film starring Tom Hiddleston, Mia Wasikowska, and Jessica Chastain, and controversially, I really enjoyed this movie. I ended up giving it 4.5 out of 5. I think it's being kind of unfairly treated, particularly because it was advertised as a horror film, and a lot of people went in expecting a horror film, and really Crimson Peak is a gothic romance, and that's the mindset that you should go into this movie with. I thought it was absolutely beautiful. I thought the characters were interesting. Jessica Chastain in particular is wonderful in this movie, and the other two leads are great as well. Like I said, I really enjoyed it. Check out my review. After that, I went to see Steve Jobs, directed by Danny Boyle and written by Aaron Sorkin, starring Michael Fassbender as Steve Jobs, and that movie is so good. If you haven't seen it, you are definitely missing out, and I know not a lot of people saw it. You guys should go see it if it's playing anywhere around you. I ended up giving this movie 4.5 out of 5 stars. I'm sure you've heard critics rave about it, and I definitely agree with them. Check out my review for more information, and I honestly can't recommend this movie enough. It is one of my favorite movies of 2015 at the moment. I also ended up watching Bridge of Spies, which is the only movie I didn't do a full review on because I kind of saw it later than the opening weekend, so I felt like it was kind of too late to review it. It is a pretty solid Spielberg film, but it kind of takes a minute to get going, and by a minute I mean an hour. The first hour of this movie is essentially a procedural drama starring Tom Hanks, and then after that initial hour, the actual movie starts, and that's where things get interesting. and that's where things get exciting, and we get to the actual story of the prisoner exchange between the Soviet Union and United States, and that's where you can tell it's a Spielberg movie, because the first half of the movie you're kind of like, is this a Spielberg movie? You can't really tell. But it ended up being really, really good, and what was interesting is that it didn't judge the characters at all. If I were to rate this, I would give it 4 out of 5 stars, and it's definitely a movie that's worth checking out. It's a solid drama. It is an interesting story. It just takes a while to get going, and there are some minor things that I'm not going to get into, but overall, I would still recommend this, but I wish the main story started a little bit faster. And the last movie that I saw in October is Room, starring Brie Larson and Jacob Tremblay. I ended up giving it 4.5 out of 5 stars because it is really, really good. It is a wonderful and powerful story. Fascinating film, great performances. I do have a full review of this on my channel as well, so check it out. It is about a mother and a child, and they live, for some reason, if you haven't seen the trailer, you don't know why. Don't watch the trailer. They live in this small room, and the kid has been raised to believe that the room is all that there is to the world, and that's kind of all you need to know about this movie. So definitely watch the film if you haven't already, and check out my review that I posted recently. That's it for my October wrap-up. As you can see, I had a pretty awesome month of reading and watching things, because pretty much everything that I saw and read I actually enjoyed, which never happens, and I really hope it continues for the rest of the year at least, because it's really sad when you get into something like a film or a book and it just doesn't work for you. I don't want that to happen to me. But let me know if you have read or seen some of the same things, and what did you think of them. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching, and if you did enjoy, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and also subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I hope you're having an amazing day, and I will see you soon in my next video. Bye!